The Future of Freedom of Expression in the Middle East, from Skyline International.
Thank you. I would like to, let's start our event or inauguration. We have amazing guests with us that will help us understand better these issues and the region, no? And the Middle East and the European Union. I would like to show you what we are doing in Skyline, what is it about, and what we hope to achieve in the future. We're trying to build a slightly different organization based, fully based on freedom of expression, fully based on recording and making an archive of all these cases and bringing this issue to the public and create awareness about this issue. So to start the debate, I think it would be interesting to start in where are we now, right now, no? And perhaps Ibrahim could talk a little bit about this. Where are we in regarding freedom of expression in the Middle East? Where are we really now?
Thank you, Daniel. The reality we witness at the moment, the worst situation for human rights, and in particular for freedom of expression across the MENA region. If you go back to 2000, the year 2000, you see all our colleagues, they were free, working for human rights publicly, participating in various international meetings, including the 3 sessions of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. But now we are in 2020, most of our colleagues now in prison. Dr. Mohammed Al-Qahtani in Saudi Arabia and his colleagues. Women human rights defenders, Lujain Al-Hadlul, Nasim Al-Sada and Samar Badawi and others. If you go to Emirates, Ahmed Mansour, Dr. Nasser Ibn Ghaid, Dr. Mohammed Al-Rukun, Dr. Mohammed Mansouri, and it's the same. The list is very long. If you talk about Syria and other countries in Egypt, our colleagues are attacking daylight in the streets, such as what happened to Jamal Eid, the head of the Arabic Network for Human Rights Information. So I would say that we are facing really some of the most oppressive actions against civil society organizations and against the vendors of the freedom of expression. Now, I could outline the trends that we are seeing at the moment. The independence of the media is not respected. Shutdown of all the independent newspapers, such as Al-Zaman in Oman and Al-Wasat in Bahrain, targeting all those people who are trying their best to comment on public affairs. Now, I could tell you one thing that is really very clear, very visible to any observer. The traditional media is owned by governments or by pro-government groups, and on occasions by the intelligence themselves. So people went to the social media networks to express their views. Then oppressive governments created cybercrime law to imprison online activists. So that's
we could to some extent, sorry to stop you there, Khalid. So we could I mean, from your words, I could take 2 things. There is sort of war on freedom of expression, if you would like to speak it like this, and perhaps as the technology, governments were not, being smart enough or understanding the technology early enough. The people used the technology to express their opinion, no? And before, during the Arab Spring, no, during that period of time, we saw this explosion of freedom of expression in the region. Everybody was talking in Twitter, in Facebook. Everybody was able to, people needed to express this idea, but governments catch up with the technology, they catch up with the law. Perhaps Radha here could also perhaps tell us something about this too.
Yeah, just as you were touching on, it's the opinion of against governments. It's speech against a regime, against a justice system, obviously, that's getting people arrested or tortured even, or thrown in secret prisons. But then it's going even a step further than that, I think. And as you know, with the UAE cybercrime laws, are a great example of how that can not only affect people who are speaking negatively about the government and social media users, but it goes so far as to criminalize social media posts that have even been made from outside of the country. So we actually had someone arrested just last year, and they had made a post in the United Kingdom about 18 months before traveling to Dubai. And when they arrived in Dubai, they were arrested for that post, even though it wasn't even made in the country. So that is such an extraterritorial application of cybercrime laws, to the point that it puts anyone traveling through that country at absolute risk, because anyone who has an interest in the region, I think, has probably at some point violated these cybercrime laws, whether they know it or not. And that can simply be just from sharing a post on Facebook or sharing a news item on Twitter or something like this, that could actually be illegal. And of course, they're probably not going to be arrested at the airport on arrival, but if anything else happens or they annoy someone else, that person might stalk their historic social media posts and find something and then report them, and then they can be arrested for that. So I think that's a huge oppression of freedom of speech. But then there's also, I mean, it goes to the extreme of, if you give a hotel a bad review, or you rent a car and you review them and give them 1 star and complain about their customer service, people have also been arrested for that. So I think it's gone to quite an extreme, and you have journalists working over in the UAE, Bahrain and Qatar, who are just absolutely scared to tell the truth, because of course they're not allowed, they're government controlled. And they can't wait to sort of leave the country and actually speak about, you know, their experience over there. So they're at great risk of being arrested if they happen to not toe the line entirely. And I've spoken to CNN journalists over there and Fox journalists who have said that, you know, they're worried. They do everything under the radar, but they're certainly worried. And, you know, they use VPNs to communicate. And of course, having a VPN is illegal because they can't, well, monitor you as much as they want.
They would like to. And here perhaps Antonio also could bring something about what is the European Union about doing about this, or if is the European Union aware of these issues and they're doing anything about it. Antonio, we can't hear you. That's to the mute.
I think most of the people is not aware of this problem. The restrictions of the free speech is so strong in all the countries. I think it's very difficult, it's very different, the position the people of the about, for example, global warming or data protection. Most of the people are so aware of this problem, but I think it's necessary the mass media and
awareness, no? More awareness.
I don't know. It's necessary to press or aware European Union of this problem, because it's terrific, the situation now, the free speech in the most of the countries, especially in the Mediterranean region.
And going back to this matter, Khalid, what do you think we're seeing this war? I mean, what did all this is unfolding? What is this so much pressure to limit freedom of expression online? When if you scratch a little bit on the surface, many countries in the MENA region, in their constitutions, they recognize freedom of expression. And even, you know, though we don't know, they do not honor maybe, you know, the articles in the constitution, however, it's recognized, it's something that is there, no? What is happening, Khalid? Why is this war at this time? No, why is this pressure at this time happening?
Well, you need to study the mentality of the ruling families and oppressive governments in our region.
Okay.
They just don't want any threat to their hold of power. That's number one. And you mentioned the Arab Spring, and after which really they felt that really people have power. And as you know, human rights defenders and independent journalists, always they are in the front line. They are having that power to mobilize populations. So that is the real equation here for governments to feel that people who are working for human rights, independent journalists who are working on corruption, and other civil society actors are a threat to their hold of power. So you are facing some corrupt politicians, some oppressive governments who are trying their best to just promote their own voice. Any other voice will be targeted. Any other activity in the name of human rights will be treated really so badly. In our region, those people who are called the human rights defenders are treated worse than criminals. Criminals, they could be released after serving 2/3 of their sentence, and they could travel anywhere. But defenders, those people who are defending freedom of expression, they will stay in prison. We have them in the Emirates. They are still in prison and other places. They don't know why they are in prison and for how long, maybe due to a simple post on Facebook or a short tweet on Twitter.
Yes. So there is sort of fear, a great fear among the ruling elite that the power that I know that freedom of expression has, no, to change views and to open the debate and to question their policies and to bring a better governance, perhaps, no, and better human rights, if you want, as a whole, right? Very interesting. However, when you go to the European Union and you check on their website, you know, about their achievements regarding human rights and freedom of expression, in their website they basically expose that or declare that they have spent so much resources or during the last decade or so in trying to bring human rights and democracy to the Mediterranean region. However, if we look into what is going on right now, and despite this great investment, no, of the European Union in trying to create or to support, no, freedom of expression in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean region, why our policy in the EU policy is having such a limited impact in the region, in the Middle East? Because we see this pressure mounting and increasing among countries that have preference in our relationship. I mean, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. These countries have a direct relationship with the European Union, great, no, business deals, and the European Union was supposed to be protecting human rights and kind of demanding from these countries to do something more, perhaps, regarding this issue. Why are we having such a limited impact in the region, do you think? Ibrahim, Radha, perhaps, Antonio?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting from my point of view is, well, the UK, the US and the European Union and their various attitudes towards the human rights breaches happening in the Middle East. The EU is very aware of it, and I mean, they haven't really been advocating, even when they have their own citizens who are suffering human rights abuses there. It's really difficult to actually motivate them to intervene in those cases and pressure Middle East governments at all. But I think largely that's coming down to sort of diplomatic and commercial relations that they have. And I mean, that's certainly something that has to change. But I mean, the human rights violations are taking place in the Middle East countries, but they're also exporting it to the EU and actually costing the EU money. For example, if we're talking about freedom of speech, we have a lot of journalists and a lot of activists who are listed as either terrorists or have been falsely accused of a crime, convicted in their absence in these countries, and then placed on the Interpol database, which leads to their arrest in European Union countries. where they are then detained for 6 to 12 months in some cases and subject to extradition proceedings. This is costing the EU governments a fortune, but it's also allowing these countries to export their oppression to the EU. So that's going even a step further. And I think that's seriously concerning, and the EU really needs to have some plan on how to deal with it, because at the moment, I think we're really encouraging these countries to the point where they feel that it's okay to threaten people on their soil. I mean, we've seen a couple of cases in the US recently about death threats against US citizens by Middle Eastern countries. We've seen threats against EU citizens from Sheikh Mohammed saying that we're going to get you anywhere if you talk about this publicly, and that was in relation to Sheikh Latifah. And of course, you know, at the other end of the scale, we've had Khashoggi, who was a journalist and who was outspoken with his points of view. So if we don't say no to this in the Middle East, they're getting more and more confident to export this kind of oppression to our borders and inside our countries, and that puts us seriously at risk.
There is some of lot of coordination. Like if you know how European foreign policy works, we have 21 members, EU members, that each one has its own foreign policy, and to coordinate such efforts seems very hard and difficult, and that brings chaos. Brings a little bit of lack of control, where perhaps these states are able to get with it without much problem, without much pressure from the European Union, where there should be much more pressure about what's going on and saying, hey, you're doing things that it's not okay. You should be changing your laws, changing, how you work. And that, I think, it's a big problem. This lack of coordination within the European Union.
And I mean, there's some other things that I've noticed in some cases that I've been dealing with coming towards European citizens, is when they are actually exercising their free speech or complaining about a regime or a ruler in a Middle Eastern country, that going to the extent of hiring and instructing and employing our own companies and our own specialists in those areas to even breach laws within the EU. So we're talking about hiring people to hack human rights activists, to hack journalists, to hack people who are litigating against them in the US and Europe. So again, they're using their money and their influence and their power to infiltrate the private sector in Europe, which is pretty much unregulated when it comes to this kind of dealings. It's fairly new, and the kind of lobbying efforts that they're paying for in our countries as well. So I think that's something that maybe needs to be looked at too.
True, because I don't know if you remember, very recently too, there is a case that was not in the Middle East, was actually in Barcelona, when the president of the
yes, it is the case of the I'm sorry, it's the case of the Hamza Yassin. It is a journalist detained in Barcelona for national court, where it is my job, because I has been working in national court for 15 years. In the case of the Hamza Yassin, he has the statute of refugee, but nobody knows what is exactly the efficiency of this statute. And finally, the judge, Ismael Serrano, was decided to educate a prison, and because don't have any guarantees in order to leave the country. Finally, there was a intervention in the Parliament, the European Parliament, and the next day that this intervention has been taken, the government of Spain closed the case, and immediately the court decided to put him free and decided the freedom of this journalist. But
so the constant support, no?
yes, in other cases, for example, in the Dogan Al-Handi, in this case, it was the Central Court number 4. Immediately, the judge decided to put in freedom the journalist, but the authorities of Germany was very upset of the decision of the authorities of Spain in order to put the notice read in Interpol, because they thought that Spanish authorities are not diligent in order to restrict the red notice in Interpol. Produce a lot of problems in our court, and a lot of explanations of Spanish authorities to Germany. But one of the cases for me most amazing, most daunting, is the case of Ramsey Cartel, because this is a man that belonged to PKK, no?
PKK, yeah.
Yes, he was detained, but for 4 countries, and in Spain detained again. And everybody was thinking we are crazy, because it's not possible that some people suffer the same situation another again. And I think it's a lack of coordination. And in most of the cases, I think the authorities take some agreements with other countries that are not positive for human rights.
Human rights, and now I think you brought about a very interesting point, not how sometimes regarding cases within the European Union we see a lot of disagreement. However, there was a particular case in Catalonia. Also, you could also relate to this case. It was Roger Torrent. He's the president of the Catalonian Parliament.
Yes.
That very recently discovered in his phone that his phone was hacked by an application called Pegasus. It's a military application to basically take over your phone. This software is developed by Israel, but Israeli military. This is a military-grade software used for military operations and anti-terrorism, security, to track now the movements of terrorists with their phones, right? So there's been, and this is what Radha was talking about, there's been sort of leak between the private sector, with the Israeli military sector, with the private sector, where men that were trained in the military, Israeli military, open enterprises, benefiting from the technology that they created in the military, and sometimes that enhance their users, their power to spy on devices and to and this software it is developed, that is being developed by a military company, is being sold now worldwide to any government that desires to purchase this software and use it with with their citizens. When we know that most human rights protects the right of privacy of individuals, and we know that this company in Israel is selling this software to countries that do not respect human rights, among them Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and I'm sure Egypt and other countries too, they're benefiting from this technology. No, this is, I think, something that somehow the European Union is not aware enough that is happening, that the European Union should be, I think, more to research more, investigate more, understand how this is happening, and perhaps creating legislation that would prevent this from happening. I mean, companies that Israel is supposed to be also a great partner of the European Union, and it is enhancing dictatorships to enhance their power. That should be incompatible with being part of the of the club of the European Union. That's how I see that, right? Khalil, how do you see all this issue?
Well, to be honest with you, I raised this issue many times in a lot of EU meetings, and it is ongoing. For example, our website is blocked in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Likewise, hundreds, if not thousands, of websites that focus on human rights. They are blocked using software and hardwares imported from the West. There are companies across Europe and in Canada and in other countries. They are supporting oppressive governments to monitor the internet and to monitor the activism. This is really very serious cooperation. My colleague Ahmed Mansour is in prison, sentenced to 10 years in prison, and the Emirati government used software and hardware imported from Israel, the company that you mentioned, SNO. And there are other companies like NetSweeper in Canada, Hacking Team in Italy. Itself, SNO, it has branches in UK. So the EU needs to act. Although the EU is the biggest donor for civil society organizations, although the EU in 2004 adopted, the European Union adopted the EU guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders. It was reviewed in 2004, but to be honest with you, these guidelines are never implemented in our region. Defenders are getting to prison. They have no access to the embassy. They don't know who is the human rights officer in these embassies. So really, there is much that needs to be done to put human rights before profit. Visibility. You can't go to visit one of these countries in which hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent people are in prison and just talk about trade. You need to talk about human rights. You need to meet human rights defenders. You need to put human rights in the agenda. That is the main question for Europe. We appreciate its support to civil society organizations, but then during its talks with oppressive governments in our region, they just need to have a human rights agenda. All the time they are saying human rights in the heart of our work, and we need to see that in our region.
True. I totally agree with that assessment, that it is on paper, but no one seems to care or to put the resources needed to do something about this. And I think at this level, perhaps we should be talking about sort of watchdog or office at the European level that will be sort of looking what's going on online, because sometimes it's really concerning. However, and I would like to change the tone now. You know, despite this situation, these challenges, these problems, also, do we have really any successful case? Do we have any example in the MENA region that we could consider to be a success in terms of promoting freedom of expression and in terms of trying to also coordinate better with the other, countries in its surrounding them, among the European members? Khalid?
Yes, we have a lot of story of success. I have to say that we don't have a local remedy. There's no place in our countries in which you go and make a complaint against official, any official that committed killing or torture. Impunity is really is something that you could see it in any country in our region. But as such, we don't have any option just to use the international mechanisms, including the EU and the UN system. One of the stories of success is Yemen. In Yemen, there was a committee, a local committee to investigate the crimes against humanity, committed by various parties. It didn't work. They did nothing. But then European countries with other countries, they managed to set up the international expert committee that is doing an excellent job investigating crimes against humanity in Yemen, led by Kamal Jandoubi, a human rights lawyer, very well known for his human rights work in Tunisia. He is still working, and we are also working with various European countries and civil society organizations to enforce their authority and their mandate. Still, they are going on in their work. And also there are other stories, lot of stories. Isra al-Ghumgham, a peaceful protester in Saudi Arabia, she faced death penalty, but with a wide international campaign, we managed to force authorities in Saudi Arabia to publicly say she is not facing death penalty anymore. There are a lot of examples, but I give the floor to my colleagues.
Yeah, I was thinking about Tunisia as well. For instance, Radha, Radha, anything you would like to add, perhaps?
Yes, I mean, what we've seen becoming successful is more the litigations that are forcing the accountability. So we've been able to establish jurisdiction in the US, the UK, and other European countries, which means that violations that are occurring in the Gulf region are able to be taken to our local courts here, which is going to force some change as they realize there are consequences internationally to their actions. So I think that's a great start. On the Interpol abuse, which has been something I've been working on for about 10 years, that's kind of taking off in Washington. There's a working group with the Heritage Foundation, and that's influencing change at the Senate level in Congress level in the US, which hopefully is going to force Interpol into a situation where they're accountable for accepting notices from countries like Egypt, Turkey, and the Gulf region, who have really put a lot of journalists on the Interpol database. So we're seeing change there, but mostly on the litigation accountability front.
That is a great news. I mean, I think it's a good step, a solid step forward to bring accountability to the table and to make them realize that, you know, actions have consequences also, not only in the countries, but abroad. Very interesting. Also, I was reading or watching some videos on YouTube, that they claim that Tunisia has become sort of a model, a democratic model in terms of human rights also, that is doing great steps. I'm not saying that Tunisia is perfect, but it is sort of managing very well a transition from dictatorship to a more democratic form of government where human rights and freedom of expression are a priority. Do you agree with this?
Sorry?
Do you agree with this assessment that Tunisia is becoming a model that perhaps could be even, could influence the I'm not saying going to export it, but it could influence its neighbors, and it is becoming sort of an exception in all this drama and problems we're seeing in other regions, in other parts of the Middle East?
Middle East, I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, I am studying the case of Morocco. Morocco is a country that is so integrated in the international community. And for me, I am so pessimistic about the situation because the main tools that the Statute of Refugee and the right of asylum is in nowadays is nothing in most of the country, because it's very difficult, the proceedings, and it's confused the situation of the people who are requested or who are persecuted for and other countries, and other problems, economical problems that is not the case. But I recognize that the European Union have made a big effort in regard to the promotion, or for example, it's so interesting the guidelines that the Council publish every year. Is so interesting that the conclusions and support of the Association of Journalists and other countries, but for me it's difficult to recognize aspects positive in nowadays.
Antonio, so what I'm understanding, you have a very pessimistic view about the future, and this is where I would like to move on now. You know, given that we have spoke about all these matters right now, how do you see the future coming? Antonio already made, you know, sort of assessment. I see this pessimistic. I think we're moving slow, basically, and things are not, you know, it's too little, too late. Let's say too little, too late to make a difference. How do you see this, Ibrahim and Radha? As pessimistic as Antonio, perhaps?
Well, Radha, go ahead, Radha. No problem.
I mean, I'm seeing the Israel-UAE deal. I think free speech in Israel is quite strong. You've got oppositional newspapers there. I think that's going to have a positive influence as far as change. I think it's inevitable. I mean, they can't keep going as they are and expect to play in the international community. They can't keep the current cybercrime laws up in the UAE and expect tourism to keep going without, you know, the impact as far as hacking and the utilization of forces against us. Again, I've got cases at the moment going on, litigations against these the parties that have been utilized by the Middle Eastern countries to hack. So I think that's also going to have to change. I am optimistic. I think it's going to take a while, obviously. They don't want to change overnight. They're going to lose out in certain ways and gain in others, but I do think it's inevitable. And I think as each country sort of pushes the other one, they're just going to have to do it. There's
some leverage, like modernity and the times are catching up somehow, and you want to know, if you want to develop an economy, to work with tourism, to attract investment to your country, you would definitely start taking seriously some of these issues. And Ibrahim, how do you see this?
Well, I share optimism with Radha. I am very optimistic about the future. I know that the peaceful change is coming. It will take time. We have chronic problems across the region, the lack of respect to public freedoms, including freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and other kind of freedoms. But the reality, we are witnessing the emerging of a strong civil society movement. Look at Iraq, the popular movement that started on the 1st of October 2019. They are still there in Al-Tahrir Square in the very heart of Baghdad and other cities. In Lebanon, they are also still protesting against, you know, the well-established, all the government and all politicians, mostly they are corrupt. And across the region, we see that phenomena, that the new independent organizations are trying to make a change in their societies. And then we are in the 21st century. The world is a small global village. We are well connected. People are seeing what is happening outside, and they know now better about their rights. So it is a matter of time. We are just moving in the right direction. We have difficulties. We have oppressive governments, but there are a lot of ways in which we are trying our best to have this peaceful change, human rights litigation. I know that we don't have local remedies, but we are trying to do the same, as Radha mentioned, and others are doing the same. And then you have this networking between civil society organizations at all the levels, national, regional, international. We are here, we are doing networking, we are working together. So we have to be optimistic. There is no any other option for us to be optimistic and to make sure that freedom will prevail in our region.
Antonio, perhaps with you now that you look like the pessimist in comparison with this great optimist. I would like to ask, what would you like to see happening, in the recent near future? Perhaps what would you desire? What would you really think it would make a difference in this issue happening in the near future?
Let us hear from Antonio, because we want to. Yeah.
I have been a witness of evolution and progress in mutual cooperation, in cross-border cooperation, in criminal matters, for example, is so interesting. But I think most of the government have a lot of fear. They are scared about the possibility to transmit information free. We must remember that the recognition of freedom of expression implies a lot of restrictions of state controls, and it's possible to use for most of the radical groups. This group has the first to use the freedom of expression. But this fact have a translation, it have produced a lot of problems in order to mutual confidence, the necessary trust in the countries. For example, the question about internet. A lot of countries are restricted the internet and the transmission and the information. Finally, the governments are working in order to protect his own interests in not to mutual confidence. That is the only solution for free speech.
And Radha and Ibrahim, perhaps, what would you like to see in the future? What we can do better at the European level? How do you see? What would you like to see happening? Perhaps, what direction would you like to see these things going forward? Though I got already an idea, I think, for some of the words you said before.
Yes, I mean, well, certainly what I'd like to see is the European Union bringing up these issues. At the moment, it's being left to the private sector entirely, to lawyers taking it to the European Human Rights Court or the United Nations, and the government's essentially deferring it to us as citizens to stand up for ourselves on an individual basis. There doesn't seem to be any pressure coming from them diplomatically to stop the kind of violations that we're seeing on our own soil, let alone to our citizens in these countries. I think that the governments are allowing Gulf nations basically to market to our citizens. That's, in the private area, in the media, public relations agencies, and they're not even issuing warnings to their citizens about what could happen to them if they go to these countries. So I think if we pushed back a little bit and started warning our citizens of the risks of doing business, because at the moment we're seeing most foreign governments are actually encouraging the mutual trade in the private sector, mutual commercial interests. I know the Canadians were really heavily marketing for private citizens to invest into the UAE without giving them any warnings that whatever they invest into these countries might very well be stolen from them and they could end up in jail. So I think that governments could absolutely just make a very, very important start by warning their own citizens about the risks. Allowing all of that marketing, allowing all of that selling from the Gulf without giving the warnings is a green light to these countries that they can do whatever they want and we don't care. And I think if we give those warnings, that would be quite sufficient to let those countries know, okay, we're going to have to change if we want to continue doing business at this level. And it really, most change comes down to commerce, and that's the bottom line. It's the financial investment. What do these countries want from us? Yes, they want us to go there and invest. They want us to send our best skilled engineers to develop, you know, for example, Qatar. And we're doing that willingly. We're allowing that, and we're even promoting Qatar, as an example, to our citizens in the UK, but not asking anything back in return. And I think that just needs to be done. And if we don't get those basic safeguards offered back to us in return for marketing these countries, it's not much of a mutual collaboration for everyone, and it makes it unsafe. So I think if we started to do that, warn people, then that will lead to that sort of change. And that can include free speech, and it can include any other issue that we see as a major human rights violation.
Oh, funny, Rita. I mean, I'm amazed. you opened my head like, wow. That was amazing. You're right. No, how just warning people of what they're going to see or to may encounter in certain circumstances can create a pressure, can create a lot of pressure. And the country say, hey, this is how people look at us, that we're dangerous, no? And that, you know, that could lead to change, you know, that sort of very simple thing could lead to a great change. Really, that I'm amazed by this idea, outstanding. And Ibrahim, how do you see this?
Well, as somebody working in the field with the vendors, really, there are some short-term activities or actions that could be taken by the European Union. They are not costly. They could do them immediately. Just to open up their embassies, to implement the EU guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders, to show visibility. We have colleagues in prisons across the region. Visit Dr. Mohammed Al-Qahtani in Riyadh. Visit Ahmed Mansour in his cell. He's on solitary confinement since the 20th of March 2017. That is torture, psychological torture, to put somebody in isolation for many years. So it is not going to take them that long to demand a visit to see him as international observers, and they have that ability. So I'm asking for visibility as a short-term action that could be taken. I'm asking for them to implement the guidelines, to show support publicly to the human rights defenders and to the independence of their press. I want them, when they visit our countries, to meet with civil society organizations, to say that we ask you, governments, to stop targeting of those people. They are just innocent citizens. They are looking for a brighter future for everybody. That is for the short-term actions, but for the long-term, really, you need to have a strategy. It's about you and me and everybody, as Radha said. Like, if you are going to imprison every peaceful voice in our region, we are going to pay the cost. Look at those who attack in New York and Paris and all the cities, Baghdad. You know, they are terrorists. And as my colleague Samar Badawi said, if you put all the peaceful voices behind the bar, only the terrorists will be out there. So we have to work together. We need to have a strategy for a peaceful change in our countries. They need to really to look at the cost of their support to oppressive governments. One of the main reasons why my colleagues are still in prison is this unconditional support given to oppressive governments in our region, whether by some countries in the EU or mainly by US and UK. So we have to address that. We have to end that. And for that, we need a strategy to work. That will take some years to come. Thank you.
I mean, Ibrahim, you're talking about kind of like the big thing, no? At diplomatic level, at the political level, being more, no, to pressure more with a coherent strategy that we unify our forces. Though since I've been familiar with working with diplomacy in the Spanish embassy in Beirut, you know, I work as a translator, and I seen many missions coming, you know, from Spain to Lebanon to do business, huh? Yes. Either to buy wine or to sell cars or whatever, you know. And these were great missions. I mean, we're talking about 10, 12, 13, 14 businessmen coming to the country. And with all honesty, at any time, at any moment, the issue of human rights, freedom of expression, or what's going on was included in the agenda in any way. If ever was actually hidden and always kept as a way.
Unfortunately.
Like, as much, there is always the idea to give the impression that Lebanon was, sort of a nation democracy coming out of the civil war, and things were working fine. Well, that's yes, Ibrahim, that's the great work, and I think we need to start planning the strategy that you just mentioned. Finally, I think more or less we have discussed the future of freedom of expression. Can you believe it? In 1 hour, we have take on so many sides and so many topics. I really want to thank all of you. I think this has been a great debate, more than expected, with all honesty. And very soon you will see a report now with your views and with all these interventions that I think is crucial to help shape our organization as well, and to start thinking of the strategies, as Khalid was mentioning before, and the goals we want to develop for the coming year. And I would like to invite you on other occasions, perhaps, to discuss other topics in relation of freedom of expression. And of course, Skyline is here to help you and to collaborate with you in other projects that you are thinking of to support freedom of expression in the Middle region. Take care, guys, and see you soon.